This is WZRD Chicago 88.3 FM. And we have with us at WZRD via Zoom Scott Wajda, President of the Client Advisory Council at Trilogy Behavioral Healthcare. And he might be wearing a couple of other titles as well. How are you today, Scott?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
Good, very well. First of all, are you also a, a vision keeper at a local church as well, in addition to president of the Trilogy Client Advisory Council?
Yes. In 2018, I was chosen as the St. Mary's Vision Keeper. That's an award given to each faith community that's a member of the Interfaith Action of Evanston gets to choose a Vision Keeper for the year. And I was chosen as St. Mary's Vision Keeper for that year.
Mhm. And what did you do to deserve that award?
I did a lot of volunteering. At that time, I was the coordinator of each through Interfaith Action. They host warming centers, and at that time, before the pandemic, each faith community, there were like 7 different faith communities hosted warming centers. And St. Mary's was one of those that hosted a warming center on Wednesdays. And I was the coordinator of that warming center for like 2 years. And I volunteered at that warming center for about 3 years before that. So I was a volunteer for maybe a total of 5 years at the warming center.
You did say warming center, such as when the weather gets cold during the winter, it's a warming center, that kind of warming center?
Yes. Between November 1st and March 31st, Interfaith Action of Evanston hosts these warming centers.
And so you were, we know that you had difficulties with mental health and depression. So while you worked at the warming centers and as president of the Client Advisory Council at Trilogy Behavioral Healthcare, was it part of your therapy, or was it something that you liked and that you enjoyed being active in the community, or was it both?
Well, I realized that, when I lived at Albany Care, I realized I needed to get out of that building and do something, So I started going to St. Mary's, just to do something. But what I realized was the more I did that, the more alive I felt, or the better off that my depression was. I also attended several of Interfaith's soup kitchens while I lived at Albany Care too. So that was something else that I did to get out of the building of Albany Care. I also, naturally after I moved out of Albany Care, I continued to do those things, It wasn't until I moved out that I started volunteering at the warming center. And also that I also volunteered at the emergency overnight shelter that they had as well. So I also volunteered there as well. And then as I went along, after I moved out, I'd start doing this and that, and a little more of this, a little more of that, And I just find that if I keep active, and my depression isn't as great, so it's better. I'm better able to manage my depression. So yeah, it's something. It's not something that I started out as my therapist said, if you do this, or, I want you to do this. My therapist, that wasn't how I started it. It was something that I realized that I was bored to tears. I wanted to do something. And that's how I started it, because I wanted to do something, and I think that, so it's something that my therapist sees that is helping me. Okay. But at the same time, it's something that I want to do, that I don't need to do it, but I want to do it.
Mm-hmm. And so volunteering and being involved in the community, was it something that your therapist suggested, or did you actually start doing it even before your therapist suggested it?
No, it's something that I did before they suggested it to me. Yeah. I mean, I know by talking to other clients and other residents that it has been suggested to them, but if you're before I went into the hospital, I mean, people would ask me that, or people would say that to me, maybe you should do this, maybe you should volunteer here, maybe you should go and over here and get this job over here because they're hiring or whatever, If you're rushing, you don't want to do anything. You just don't, you're not motivated really to do much, if anything at all, and when is asking you to do something or telling you to do something, they may not be telling you to do it, but it kind of comes across as they are, to the different person,
And you said that you were living where when you started working and volunteering at the warming center? Did you say Albany Care?
Well, I did live at Albany Care, yes, but I didn't start volunteering at the warming center until after I moved out of Albany Care.
And we also learned that you were. Give us a little more background about how you started struggling with mental health, and so we know that you struggle with mental health and depression for almost your entire life, but how did this depression begin, and when did you learn that this was depression?
I would think it started very early in my life. My mom's solution to most things was to spank me. And I got this fear of my mom. So that's where I believe, most of my depression started, in the home. Now, as I grew, as I moved out and the house, started living on my own, there were several, I saw therapists, or counselors, as they were called at that time. They suggested that I take medication, but I didn't want to do it. I had been attending some 12-step meetings and things like that for adult children of alcoholics. I would see a lot of people that came into that meeting, they would share about, well, yeah, I see a counselor and they suggest I take medication, and but this medication that gives me all these side effects, and I didn't want to experience those side effects. They sounded too much for me, side effects. So it wasn't, so yeah, I went a long time until I was like probably in my mid-30s, and I had been living at Albany Care for like 3 years. And I started going to St. Mary's, church, because I was bored to tears, and I wanted to get out of that building, and so I went there and just sporadically, but after 8 months, a year, whatever, I realized, and the more I went to the church, the more I realized, yes, there might be just something to this thing about me being depressed, I'm in a facility for the mentally ill, and so there might be something that, so I am depressed, I am depressed, and then a little while after that, yes, I need, my medication helps me with my depression, and it's after going to church for a year, so that brought me to that realization.
When did you realize that it was depression? And you were worried that the medications would bring on side effects. So how did you deal with this? First of all, how did you learn that it was depression and that you did have a mental health issue? And that was while you were living at Albany Care or earlier?
Well, before I moved to Albany Care, I would see counselors. They suggested that I was depressed. They said they wanted to put me on medication, but the people that I had been talking to, that had been on medication, had all these side effects, and I didn't want these side effects that they were experiencing. And on top of that, I was very anti-alcohol at that point. That's why I was going out to adultery of alcoholic experience. My family, my siblings were, at least my two brothers at that time, they were very much into alcohol, drugs, stuff like that. I didn't want to go down that road. I didn't want to get addicted to medications, or have to take medications for the rest of my life. That was my thinking then, so I mean, that kind of like planted the seed in my head, and it was, so it wasn't really until I went into, got into Albany Care and started going back to church, and through that spirituality that I gained from going to church for that year, did I realize, yes, I am depressed, and I need medications to regulate my depression.
When you started seeing counselors, let's start at the beginning. What convinced you to take the step to see a counselor? Was it what was becoming hard to handle? And I hope that you don't mind discussing this, because this is May Mental Health Awareness Month. And if you okay with it, then just let us know how was it that you started realizing that you needed to see a counselor, and then how did you find a counselor to see?
What started it? I guess I wasn't living, I wasn't, I guess I wasn't really doing well in life. I wasn't, and I actually, if I really want to go back to the very first, it was that I was having a lot of problems in the job. I was having problems with a coworker, and this was like when I was 19, something like that. Okay, so so I got shipped off to another. I was a security guard. I got shipped off to another site. Okay, so the site that I went to, the supervisor at that site was like a full time at that site as a security supervisor, but he was also like an associate pastor at the church. So we started talking a lot, and then he suggested I go to like adult children alcoholics. Okay, so I went there, and then so when I was in those meetings, some of those people had been seeing counselors, you know, and so I thought, well, maybe I can go, you know, see a counselor. You know, and they had a sliding fee scale, and so something I could afford, you know, so I thought I'd go and talk to somebody, you know, so that's kind of how that started.
And since you did mention that you didn't want to have to deal with the side effects of the medications, did you also get the side effects then as a result of the medications?
Well, when I was in part of my first experience with medication was when I was in Elgin State Hospital, and that's when they started giving me medications, you know. And yeah, there were some of the first medications you tried to give me did have some adverse side effects. Because I was in the hospital, they were able to adjust those quickly, and they were able to put me into. Well, I mean, they were able to actually switch me to a medication called Wellbutrin for it was an antidepressant. And then for me, Wellbutrin gave me no side effects. So actually, they had me on something before Wellbutrin gave me a lot of side effects, but then they switched me to Wellbutrin, which gave me none, really. But I have heard from other people who have been on Wellbutrin that they've had many side effects, you know. So it depends on the person, on the physiology of the person, on their, you know, on their, how, it depends from person to person what kind of side effects. I mean, they suggest that they know from research that these side effects occur, but not in every person, every medication, you know, so.
And by the way, just joining us now is Bill Morton, president of the Rogers Park Chamber of Commerce, and he has also worked with you in the past. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you, Wizard, and hello, Scott. I want to thank Scott for I want to thank you for all your work you're doing with the Heating Center, with your work with the church in Evanston, with your work advocating for the patient care at Trilogy, and I really do appreciate you in your work in Rogers Park and in Evanston and citywide.
Thank you. Thank you.
I heard you speaking about the prescriptions, and there's this and there's that, and there's all these big names. And do you feel like you've become like an expert on the prescriptions you have? You have to be, don't you?
If you, yeah, some people are. Some people are. I mean, not that I am really. I mean, I've never really delved into or studied what I've been prescribed, you know, or anything like that. I you know, now when my psychiatrists when they prescribe them, did they explain them to me? Yeah, they explained them to me. And I asked some questions, and, you know, and they answered my questions. And so from that standpoint, I feel satisfied with their answers, you know. But no, I know other clients and other residents that, yeah, they are experts because they do delve into it, and they do study it. And so they'll study the medications that they are on, and they'll say, you know, and I've heard this because they, you know, maybe they're in front of me in the med line or whatever, you know. Well, you're giving me this, but it has this, in, I read that it gives you this side effects or this side effect, that, you know, because, and like I said, you know, I was on Wellbutrin with no side effects, you know, at the dosage I was at, you know. Now, some people, if they had a higher dosage, perhaps they were experiencing side effects that I would not have, I did not experience because I was at a lower dosage, you know. Now, one thing I had a lot of problems with was sleep, and I still do. And one of my psychiatrists at Trilogy tried to prescribe, or was prescribing, a bunch of medications that had a side effect of sleep. Now, one of those, I can't remember all of them. I mean, there are a lot of them, but one of those was gabapentin, which is used for epilepsy. Okay. In a very high dose, it's used for epilepsy. You know, at a certain dose, it'll take care of the epilepsy, right? But at the dose he's given me, it had no effect on that. Like, what can I say? It only had the effect of sleep for me. Okay, it didn't affect, because it wouldn't affect my system because it was primarily used for epilepsy. It wasn't going to affect my system because he's giving me it in a low dose. Only for side effect of sleep. So, which it worked, you know, for sleep. It did. It put me out, you know, but with every medication he tried that way for me, I would build a tolerance for it, you know, for the sleep, at least the sleep medication side, you know, or sleep side effect. And so that even was with like Ambien, which is just for sleep. You know, it has no other function than as a sleep aid. But again, I built a tolerance to it, and it wouldn't work for me after a while, you know. So, yeah, and again, it depends on metabolisms, you know, people's physiology, what other medications are they taking? You know, are they, also, there's a lot of people that are not, they're drinking alcohol, doing recreational drugs, stuff like that. That's going to affect the dose.
How about over medication, or maybe over prescription, like they prescribe so much. For example, speaking of prescription drugs and taking drug dealer drugs, I knew this girl, and she had all of these pill bottles all in her bedroom floor from the door to her computer. And that's where she hid her illegal drugs. And she drank like a fish. So there's a lot of things going on with this. And I don't know, is there overprescription? Because she had 100 pill bottles. Maybe it was a collection over the years. Maybe that was her pill bottle collection, but it seemed concerning.
Well, I can, give me a second.
This is WZRD Chicago 88.3 FM. And we have with us at WZRD, Bill Morton, President of the Rogers Park Chamber of Commerce, and also Scott Wajda of the Trilogy Behavioral Healthcare Client Advisory Council.
So, collection, these are empty ones. For the years that I've had, and they're good containers. I mean, they're good hard plastic, to take the label off, they're good to put stuff in, So, I mean, and so I got some of these, and, I had this, but I mean, can people be overprescribed drugs? Yeah, sure. It depends on the psychiatrist. It depends on how many psychiatrists they've seen. Do they like the psychiatrist they're seeing? Did they fire that guy and go to another guy? And maybe they weren't honest with the second psychiatrist, so maybe he's prescribing things to them that he thinks is going to take care of, not knowing what they've been prescribed in the past, so, and with mental illness, it's, there becomes a large trust issue, with clinicians. Are they telling me the truth? Are they really out for my best interest? Are they lying to me?
I've heard the argument, they just want to prescribe me so much so they could retrieve the money.
They get a cut, right? You mean, Bill? You're saying that the therapist gets a cut of the medications that they prescribe.
I don't exactly know how the system works, but I know that, they get money.
What do you know about this, Scott? Have you been able to research that? When therapists when they prescribe medications, are they given a percentage of what the drug company gets?
Oh, that I don't know. I don't know that. I do know that they get free samples, of drugs and things like that. So I do know that. I mean, do the drug companies push their drugs to psychiatrists? I mean, say, hey, we just came out with this thing. We tested it. It works good. Give this to your patients. Sure, they do that. But, I mean, then so the psychiatrist might have 5. You might have 3, 4, 5 people, drug reps coming to him trying to get him to prescribe their drugs. Now, again, I mean, what I personally experienced with my psychiatrists are that they work with evidence-based research, and they might suggest, maybe 2 or 3 medications to eat, and they'll tell me these are all antidepressants. Okay. This one has this side effect. This one has this potential for this side effect. A has potential. B has potential for this side effect, and maybe this side effect. And C has the potential of this side effect, this side effect, and this side effect. Okay. So you get to choose, and then he's going to suggest a dosage, okay, we'll start out at this dosage. Okay. And we'll see how it works for you. Okay. And then if you come back to me in a month or 2 months and you say, well, no, that's not working too well. Maybe we should up the dose. Then we'll up the dosage, on whichever medication I pick, But again, when you go up in dosages, the chance of a side effect happening is greater than at a lower dosage. So
say you had 2 psychiatrists and they're not talking to each other, I'm assuming.
Right.
And so, how would you know which drugs interact with which? How does that work? I mean, which ones would be detrimental if you're taking them together? Do they both have a copy of your medical records? And then
they should. If the person is being honest with their psychiatrist, okay. If they should. So if somebody's moving to a new psychiatrist, okay, then they should sign a release of information, okay, for the old psychiatrist, okay, to be able to talk to the new psychiatrist, okay. Without that release of information, there's no communication going to be happening, okay. It's just not going to happen. So the client or the patient has to be honest and say, I've had a former psychiatrist, okay, and this is the medications I was on with this guy, okay, and I'm getting signed a release so you can talk to him, okay,
Mhm.
guys can get on the same page, okay, and then, you know, the drugs, the medications that the number 2 psychiatrist is might prescribe won't interact with the medications that the first psychiatrist prescribed, you know.
Mhm.
For the medications that you are prescribed, is it that all medications eventually you build a tolerance for them and they no longer work? For instance, the one that you're taking now that addresses your depression, do you have to get higher and higher dosages for that one as well?
No, actually, well, I've only been on my current antidepressants for about 2 years, you know, and on Wellbutrin, they had me on Wellbutrin for like 11 years, you know, and then, but then they gave me there's also, if you're really concerned about somebody, or, you know, or if the patient's concerned, then what they did with me was they gave me a DNA test, okay? And the DNA test identified the medications, okay, that were going to be the most effective with the least side effects.
That's very useful. When did that come up? Because if patients are able to determine which meds they could take with the least side effects just by a DNA test, wouldn't it be just a regular procedure to get a DNA test before prescribing any medications?
Right, right. And again, these tests aren't free. I mean, they're expensive, you know, so I don't know exactly. I mean, it was suggested to me, you know, that I take this test and, you know, and I don't know how many other clients at Trilogy were given that opportunity. I don't know, but I mean, I'm sure that in one of the medications that came out of that test was, I don't even know. I mean, I never got prescribed it because he said it was I'm going to call it a green pill. It was all natural, like roughage, like lettuce and all this stuff that's like put into a pill form. Okay. And he said it was insanely expensive, and the pill was. But he said it would be the most effective, and I never got prescribed it because of the cost.
Mhm.
So basically, he went with the secondary, you know, suggestion, you know. So.
And when you mentioned the DNA test, does that also cover a person building tolerance for any prescriptions? Is it that people eventually build tolerance for the drugs that they are taking, and then if they do, then they have to change medications? How is this addressed?
Yeah, I mean, eventually, well, I think that, yeah, it's like there were some medications that my psychiatrist prescribed to me for sleep that had a secondary function as a sleep aid. Okay. Now, and on some of those medications, I would say to him, well, it's not working so well, you know, for sleep. And he goes, okay, we'll bump up the dosage. Okay. So we bumped up the dosage a little bit, you know. And just a few months later, I came back to him and said, you know, well, you know, it's kind of worn off now, you know, you bump up the dosage again. He'd go, well, you know what, if we bump it we bump up the dosage even more, you're getting into an area where you might have side effects with this this medication for its primary use, you know. So and a lot of times I would just say, okay, we'll try something else, you know. So it's yeah, it's as you go higher in dosage, like I said before, the likelihood that a side effect will occur is greater than at a lower dosage. And if you have a good psychiatrist, they're going to tell you that. They're going to say, okay, if the higher you go, the more likely you're going to have a side effect on this medication, and should give you that option. You know, saying, yes, I want higher dosage, or no, I don't want higher dosage, or, you know, because they're always coming out with new medications too, you know. So, there might be a medication out there that that addresses your particular illness or need better than what you're on now, you know, maybe at a lower dosage, or doesn't have the side effects that you're experiencing at the time.
Well, let's start at the beginning, and maybe you could advise people who have been in your situation. For instance, when you were struggling with mental illness and depression without maybe realizing it, did you have trouble finding housing, and then finding a job? If people were in your position, looking back now, how did you address the situation? How would you advise people who are in that situation?
Well, well, yeah, housing's hard because it's if you're not diagnosed, or if you're not in subsidized housing, then it's difficult. And for me, it was, you know, I had I couldn't get to my jobs on time. I just, that was one thing, my big thing. I wouldn't be on time, you know. Self-sabotage type situation. And I was constantly getting fired, you know, stuff like that. But really, and then I got, and then, so I had, yeah, or I got addicted because I was, you know, I didn't clean my place, you know. So I got evicted from, I didn't clean my place, you know, and I got evicted and I needed a new place to go. And I was going through the apartment ads one day, you know, and there was an ad for subsidized housing, like in the paper. You know, you don't ever see that ever, you know. And so I called, you know, and you know, and they said, oh yeah, we got availability, you know. And I go, you know, you don't ever see this. You have to get on the list and all that, you know. And the woman goes, she goes, well, we had a bunch of at that time, we're talking like in 95, maybe 95. We sent out a notice to everybody in our buildings that they had to come to the office and they had to fill out some paperwork. Okay. Well, it happened that a lot of the people that were living in their buildings were illegal immigrants. Okay. And they didn't come to the office. Okay. They just left the apartment. Okay. So, and she goes, you know, in the paperwork that we were going to have them fill out had absolutely nothing to do with immigration, but they didn't want to come to the office to chance that. So they left, so we have all these openings. So that's how I got in subsidized housing in where I was, So I got in there, and then I was there. I was in there, that subsidized housing for like 10 years, something like that, but, just happened to be at the right place at the right time, because people didn't come in to fill out the paperwork, so, and they left the apartments, and they ended up with a bunch of openings, so I was able to have a place to live for a long time. What really, in job wise, what really got me was having to go out and fill out applications all the time. So eventually I came upon, I'll just go to this temporary service, and just you fill out one application, and then they put your application out to different companies, that need temporary help, and so even if you got, and again, depending on why, if you worked there a few days or whatever, or a week or whatever, and the company didn't like you, you could always go back to temporary service and then find you another position somewhere. So, I mean, that was the benefit of the temporary service. For me, I didn't have to go up to each individual company and fill out the application, and that for me was daunting. It was, I had a lot of rejection that way too. I got rejected a lot. I felt I would be rejected a lot. Because of my depression, I wasn't in a good mind frame to have an interview, or, or look like somebody that the company would want to hire, so.
What would you have done differently now? And there might be people that would be in your situation. How were you able to meet the rent? And how were you able to know that it was depression? How did you learn that it was depression, and that you could do something about it? You seem to be in a position to give people some advice about this.
Well, again, I started living at a facility for the mentally ill, elderly care. It wasn't until I lived there for 3 years that I realized I am depressed and I need medication for my depression. It wasn't until 3 years after I started living at that place till I realized, yes, and I think that as I went along, and as I think this is something I came to believe after I moved out of elderly care. And I kept going to church, kept going to prayer groups, kept going to services. Came to believe that, yes, my past happened for a reason. I'm meant to be where I am today, exactly where I am today, for a reason. Could not have changed my past if I had wanted to change my past. My past happened to bring me here, on May 30th at 1:30 p.m. This is where I'm meant to be.
How did you move from subsidized housing into Albany Care?
I moved into, I checked myself into the hospital, and from there they moved me to Elgin State Hospital. I was there for 6 months, I had not been paying the electric bill at my house, at my apartment for a while before I got moved to Elgin. And while I was at Elgin, my electricity got turned off. And because I was in subsidized housing, they evicted me while I was still at Elgin. So then I had to find another place. So from Elgin State Hospital, I went to Albany Care.
Do you find that there are many people in your situation where they're not, because of mental health issues and perhaps depression, they aren't able to meet the rent and pay the bills? Looking back now, what advice would you give them if they were watching now, listening now?
For people that are mentally ill and are having trouble meeting paying their bills?
Yes, because that was kind of what was happening with you, because you were not able to hold down a job, and I don't know, besides not holding down the job, what else was happening at that time that led to you ending up at Elgin? Is that like Elgin? What's the entire name for Elgin? Elgin what?
It was the Elgin State Hospital. Yes.
Elgin Hospital. State
Yeah,
Hospital? I see.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And you checked yourself in, or did somebody did they institutionalize you?
No. I went to initially I went to I was having problems, I could say, I guess I'm staring at women. Okay, so they didn't like that. And people were thinking that I was more of a danger than I was. And that got to me. And so I went to see the police about it, and then I ended up crying to the officer. He suggested that I go to the mental psych ward at the local hospital. So I did that, and then I had like 16 weeks of aftercare, and then the place I had aftercare at, they wanted to give me services, but I didn't think I needed it. I refused. It wasn't until I got another job, started working that job, and then that I realized, yeah, I think I need services. So I checked myself back into the local hospital, but then they decided to send me to Elgin. So that's where I got transferred to Elgin, so.
You have a lot more insight now after all that has happened to you. If you were advising yourself when you were having a hard time paying the rent, and then also having the trouble with women and people thinking that you were a danger, what could you have done differently if you had only known?
I don't know. I don't think anything really. Like you said, I'm meant to be where I am today.
It's just that some people might be in your position, and you might be in a good position now to advise them so that they could find a solution and wouldn't have to, you will be able to help them, in other words.
I would talk to somebody, find somebody to talk to, whether it be find somebody to talk to that will listen to you, whether that be somebody at Trilogy, Thresholds, C4, HRDI, a pastor at a church, somebody that you can confide in, somebody that you can, that will listen to you, that feel that you're being listened to, that you're being heard. Find somebody like that.
In other words, later in your life, you did speak to people such as your pastor and your contacts at a Trilogy. So what you're saying to our listeners is that if you have been able to contact these people and develop a relationship with these people earlier, then they might have been able to help you earlier, and then you wouldn't have to have endured so much.
Perhaps, yes. And again, that's, and I also, but remember, in my, when my counselor suggested that I take medications, I refused.
Mhm.
So there has to be that willingness. There has to be that willingness to
Yes.
what the people, if you're talking to somebody that's hearing you, that you feel is hearing you, that is invested in you, then you're more likely to accept their suggestions, perhaps act on their suggestions.
When you were not willing to take the medications, was it on account of the therapist telling you about the side effects, and you did not want to deal with those side effects?
Oh, the other part of that was what they said, well, Scott, we think you're depressed, but they didn't explain it to me.
Mhm.
They didn't explain why they thought I was depressed.
Mhm.
So I didn't have a real good understanding of why do you want me to take these pills?
Mhm.
I didn't understand that completely, and I wasn't as, today I'm an open, honest, transparent recovery, and that's how I run my recovery,
Mhm.
But then I was not that way, it
Mhm.
took time for me to become that way, so, and not everything happens all at once in a flash.
Mhm.
Sometimes you used to take baby steps,
Mhm.
and baby steps are the most important,
And in other words, also if the therapist had taken the time to explain everything better to you, that would have helped a lot.
Yeah, I think so. Yes.
Then at what point did you find a therapist that was willing to explain your situation better to you, so that you were able to make a better decision?
After I had decided, realized, and accepted that I was depressed, that's when I found somebody.
And what made you finally accept that you were depressed?
Going back to church and having that spirituality and that calmness, having the slowing down, relaxing a little bit, but also being active, going out somewhere, getting outside the element of care. But also in the other part of it is I was I guess I was at a bottom. I was at my rock bottom, maybe I was, and I was at a point where I wanted something different,
Mhm.
but what was that different going to be? I was going to stay in Albany because I was staying in Albany Care like all the time. I got hardly left the building, and I got to a point where, I had heard about soup kitchens and things like that. And so I started going to soup kitchens and things like that. So, and then I was taking walks after dinner and I found St. Mary's Church on one of my walks. And, a few months went by and then I started attending services there. And, it was a way to get out of that building and go somewhere and meet people like Albany, be around different people, and, so.
When was the turning point that you finally wanted to get out of Albany and you found that route? What was the flashpoint that happened?
That I wanted to get out of Albany?
Yes.
One, the opportunity was there. The Williams Decree, they had enacted the Williams Decree. So there was an opportunity where before the opportunities to move out were very small. I mean, these agencies like Trilogy, Threshold, C4, they all had apartment programs, but they're very limited. They didn't have a lot of funds attached to those programs. Now with the Williams Decree, that opened it up completely as like a floodgates were opened. So a lot of people had the opportunity to move out. And I was offered the opportunity. And again, I had been, so I lived at Albany Care for 6.5 years. I started going back to church after 3 years. So I'd been going to church for 3 years and building up a spirituality that way. I joined some organizations within the Catholic Church, volunteered at the soup kitchen that St. Mary's hosted. So I was becoming more active, and so I wanted more, and so the more active I became, the more I wanted to be more active and kind of on my own. So when the opportunity was presented at Albany Care to move out to the Williams Decree, I applied. So.
What was that again? I didn't catch what you said about the opportunity at Albany Care.
So when the state came around to Albany Care and offered a Williams Decree, to move on, I applied for the Williams Decree.
Okay. Awesome. And then and that was the opportunity that made the big difference. And that came about because of some extra funding that came to which of the organizations? Was it on account of some extra funding that came in that presented the opportunity to you?
So somebody named Williams took the state of Illinois to court. They said, you're not providing enough funding for people to move out of facilities like Albany Care. So, and that was in like 2005, I think. And in 2010, Governor Quinn decided to settle the case. So they got a court-appointed monitor to monitor the decree. So they started moving people out of facilities like Albany Care because it was required to do it under federal mandate. Because they decided to settle the case. So that's where all that money came from.
That money came from the state, you said, or the feds?
Yes, the state.
Okay. And then what about you, when you moved out of Albany Care, you were relatively doing well for yourself because you were volunteering, and then you were learning life skills and becoming involved in the community. What about other people? Were there others that weren't as fortunate as you, and then because they were moved out, then they ended up homeless?
Yes, that does happen. Yes. Now that happens for different reasons. I know a guy who he got involved with drugs. You know, the drug dealers came over to his apartment. They started living in his apartment. Okay, he had no way to get them out of his apartment. You know, and basically he had to go back to the nursing facility. You know, and it's funny because this guy, that happened to that guy, and he went back to the nursing facility, and then he got an opportunity to move out again with Williams. So he did, but he got back into the drugs, so he didn't move back. And then they gave him one more chance. They moved out again, but then he ended up back in the nursing facility, and that's where he is now. He's been there ever since. You know, do people lose their places because they become homeless or whatever because of drugs? Yeah, sure. Yeah. Now a lot of people, you know, I know people, yeah, that moved out of facilities that were moved into an area that, like down by Wilson, right? They were living in Elviston, but they moved on down to Wilson. They got mugged, you know.
In other words, they became homeless, and we're living
Yeah,
in
for a
Wilson
little bit.
Avenue?
For a little bit. Yeah, he got mugged, and then he decided, you know, he told us whichever agency he was with, hey, I can't stand this, please move me back to facility. And then so they did that for a while, and then they moved him out again, you know. Now, yeah, but there are people that become homeless just because of their diagnosis. Okay, just because they may not take their meds like they're supposed to. Maybe they miss some appointments, you know, maybe they, you know, and there are people that will consistently take the medications, and then they're like, you know what, I don't feel any different. I don't know why I'm on medication. Why am I taking medication? Then they go off the medication, you know, so, and then they decide they don't want it anymore. They don't need it. So they go off it, and then they get, you know, out of sorts, you know, they become sick again, you know, so.
Right. And then when people are moved out of facilities, are they assigned a caseworker where they could, if they run into difficulties, they could call the caseworker and explain the situation and maybe get some help?
Now, if they move out under the Williams decree, okay, or then they are assigned an agency, which then they are assigned a caseworker. Okay, then the caseworker will check in on them, you know, and make sure they're doing okay. You know, and again, it's all about willingness. I mean, do I want my caseworker coming over twice a week? Do I feel like I'm being imposed upon? I mean, and is my privacy being invaded? You know, so it's some of the residents that get moved out put up a lot of resistance, you know, and it comes back to trust, you know, in what they experienced maybe before. Some people never moved. Some people got diagnosed real early, you know, and they've only lived in facilities. Okay, some people were able to live on their own for a little bit, but got moved into a facility, you know, and it's trust of their clinicians. You know, do I trust them? You know, and that's only something that the individual can decide. You know, and they have to run into the right people, the right clinicians that are going to take care of them the right way. And, I mean, that plays into it, so.
We hear that some patients that have mental issues, it's on account of a chemical imbalance. So do you know if patients are regularly prescribed blood work to determine if they have any chemical imbalance?
Yeah, and again, it depends on the diagnosis. Yeah, so if you're, and this all comes down to evidence-based research. So, there are some diagnoses or severity of diagnoses that require blood work regularly, so those clients would receive the blood work on a regular basis. I only get blood work like once every like 3 months or something like that, but my diagnosis doesn't require it more frequently than that, so.
So is your diagnosis of your depression, is that based on a chemical imbalance, or is it based on just the life experiences and the trauma?
Yeah, I think it's mostly life experience and trauma.
Mhm. And for those that do have chemical imbalances, do you know if the chemical imbalances causes their the mental health issue, or is it that the life circumstances and the trauma could also lead to chemical imbalances?
I think that definitely life issues. Some people might have something wrong with them when they're born. And it doesn't click in until later. It doesn't, some, but we have to, and I think we have to think about that. There's, what did the parents do? Were they taking drugs? Were they alcoholics? Did that affect the growing of the fetus in the womb? Did that cause something of a chemical imbalance? That way, and then after you're born, and what your life experiences, your trauma, but then how do you deal with that trauma? Do you take illegal drugs? I mean, do you to get drunk a lot? Does it cause a chemical imbalance in your brain? That way. Some people are like that, I guess. It's very possible that occurs that way. I guess the only for sure way to know if somebody has chemical imbalance is to give them a CAT scan, and again, but that's, that costs like, I don't know, $2,500, something like that, it's expensive, so because of evidence-based practices, a lot of psychiatrists and social workers are able to determine if you have a chemical imbalance just by talking with you. Or they may try different medications that affect the brain in different ways based on what they hear you say or observe your behaviors. So they're going to try medication based on talking and observation. And if it works the way they think it's going to work, then they know, yeah, okay, he has a chemical imbalance, or, this is going to help him, so it has a good effect on him,
Do therapists go deep into a patient's history? For instance, you did mention before, like maybe a parent drank or did drugs while the baby when the baby was still in was a fetus. So how deep do they go in a patient history to determine if maybe family history or your or the patient's history, entire history affect how the patient is at that time?
Again, they're going to talk and they're going to observe,
Mhm.
ask questions. Okay.
Mhm.
It depends on how willing the patient is to answer those questions.
Mhm.
If they're getting some resistance to a particular train of thought or a path of questioning they're going down, they may stop that questioning right away. They don't want to accept that any more than they already are. But yeah, they will ask. They do ask those questions. They do try to find out. But and again, I myself decided on open, honest transparency very early in my recovery. I decided that was going to be good for me. So my mental illness, I think, is less now than it would be if I'm not open, honest, and transparent.
Mhm. For when the therapists interact with the patient, do they usually just ask the questions, or do some patients have to fill out a questionnaire about family history?
Usually it's done electronically, meaning that like every 6 months, they'll go through a oh God, I can't remember what it is now. But like every 6 months, they'll go down and they'll talk about your goals, what you want to do in recovery or at the agency, So, they do that, but they'll do it. You're sitting with them at their computer and they and what's going on. Every year they do another assessment. So like every year annually you get like 2 assessments, and they'll go through those questions. They'll try to do and again, I mean, every year they're going to ask you again about your past and things like that, if they haven't, because they might see that last year's assessment didn't cover these questions, that are going to ask them again, but in a year, the next year, you may be more comfortable with answering those questions.
Right.
So, and so what I found is that the more information I give them, the better able they are to help me, So, but that's just me, that's just what I found to be true for myself.
Mhm. And do you feel that you have been fortunate with your therapists? Have they all been able to help you and very willing to help you?
Oh, they're always willing. They're always,
Mhm.
they're always willing. Now, depending on where I was at that time, that's depending on how far I got with, the therapist that I had at that point, so.
So it was mainly on account of your compliance that was holding you back from any way that your therapist might have been able to help you in the past.
Yes.
From your standpoint now, what you are at now, do you see a future in which you no longer need medications? Is that a possibility?
Always a possibility. Yeah, always.
Are Are you taking fewer medications now than you were before? Or more?
It's no, I've always only taken one, or no, maybe I'm on two. I mean, well, I'm definitely on one antidepressant and I take another antidepressant, Seroquel, for, I mainly take that for sleep. It has the effect of its main, I think its main function is antidepressant, but I only take it for sleep when I need it, you know.
But the effect wears off, right? With you eventually build a tolerance for it if you need to use that for sleep.
What I found with Seroquel is that it works great for sleep. It's just that if I take it, if I build it in my system, if it builds up in my system over like a 7-day period, and and for some, I also use a CPAP machine. Okay, so if for some reason the CPAP is itching my face or whatever, and I don't like it, I take it off. Okay, and I've taken the Seroquel, right? I've already taken the Seroquel, but I decided to take my CPAP off. But this is like the 8th day I've taken the Seroquel in a row. Okay, because I've taken it for 8 days in a row, it's built up in my system. So if I take the CPAP off and try to sleep without the CPAP, okay, when I wake up in the morning, I may find a book in my refrigerator, okay, or I may find a cup in my stove. Okay, so it makes me, I get up at night, you know, and I do things, you know. Now,
Sleepwalking.
yeah, so one thing I've never found is like woke up and found my door open, which is awesome. I'm really grateful I never found my door open, you know. That means I can walk outside, you know, or try to walk outside, you know. So actually I'm still having problems in sleep because I haven't found a good routine with the Seroquel, and like taking, so sometimes I take over-the-counter sleep, like ibuprofen PMs, something like that, Tylenol PMs. Those work for me. And again, you know, I have to switch them up. I have to switch them up so they don't build up so much, you know, because I eventually will have to take a bunch of Tylenol PMs or ibuprofen PMs if I want to get to sleep. But if I switch them with the Seroquel, then they don't build up in my system as much, you know.
Does your therapist ever tell you what is causing you to have these sleep problems?
No, though I have read that people with major depressive disorder usually have sleep disorders. And usually they have a lot of pain in their body.
But you don't.
I actually, yeah, when I first, yeah, I did. Until I started to until they got the In-Shape program going at Trilogy, and we started working out, you know, with a trainer, you know, and working out my, you know, then my pain kind of subsided, you know. So it's not that I still don't have pain, you know. I'm not with In-Shape anymore, but I try to work out on my own, and I ride my bike, and you know, I try to ride my bike everywhere, you know. So, that helps out,
And being outdoors more, that helps too. Did you say that as well?
Yeah, outdoors doing things, but using my bike as a mode of transportation, it just helps in itself, so not that I'm a big guy, I don't usually, or I can't usually just go out and walk around, I have to go somewhere, or I have to have a destination.
Mhm.
I just don't go out and walk around, I don't do that, so,
So you are taking medications now to address your depression, but and those medications, that medication is working. However, that medication has not been able to eliminate the sleep problem, right?
no,
Mm.
because it's not, I'd have to read up on it, but I don't think it has a side effect of sleep on it, or maybe I'm not taking a high enough dose. I don't know. For sleep, for the sleep component to kick in, I'm not sure, but so like, and the thing about medications is that I like, as on Wellbutrin, they had me on 300 milligrams of Wellbutrin, but this new medication they have me on, they only have me on 25 milligrams of it, okay, because it's a different medication, and it works. It's still an antidepressant, but because of the, I guess, the way it's manufactured or what goes into it, they only give me 25 milligrams. So it's hard to talk about, like, well, I was on 25 milligrams of this, but they had me on, they're putting me in 300 milligrams of that. It's, there's two just totally different medications that, you can't compare dosages that way, so.
How are you able to pay for these medications? What plan are you on?
Well, I have always had, since I got, well, probably when I was in the facility, I was put on Medicare and Medicaid.
Mhm.
So.
And do you have to pay for much out of your own pocket for these medications that you are taking?
Yeah, I pay, like, they give me the generic brands, so I get, like, I'll have to pay, like, I think the most I pay is like $3.60 maybe.
Per prescription?
Yes.
Mhm. So it's affordable.
Yes.
Mhm. Well, Scott, a lot has happened since we last interviewed. So let's do another assessment with you and see if your answers are different from before.
Okay.
WZRD Chicago, being a nonprofit radio station, must be responsible to the community we serve. WZRD is mandated to file quarterly issues with the FCC on non-entertainment community-focused programming. We like to assess the community for these quarterly issue topics with 3 questions. First, what is most important to you? And this is WZRD Chicago 88.3 FM. We also have with us on WZRD via Zoom, Scott Wajda, to discuss the issue of mental health in Mental Health Awareness Month of May, and also Bill Morton, president of the Rogers Park Chamber of Commerce, who has worked with Scott before. So Scott, what is most important to you?
Well, still my recovery, still advocating for others in the mental health field, still trying to bring awareness, in interviews such as this, to people who may be on the fence, about, should I see a therapist? Should I see a social worker, you know. Maybe something in my experience may prompt them to, at least talk to somebody, ask a question, get another person's perspective, so.
What long-term problem must we address?
Stigma about mental illness. And again, that's, people talking about it, people that have been through it, that have come to a place in their life where they're doing okay, talking about it, about what it was like for them, and through, because we all have different experiences with mental illness in our past, and the people in our past, and so my experience may connect with someone, and maybe prompted to ask someone about mental illness. But then, there may be other people who don't connect with my past, but may be able to connect with somebody else's, their experience, So it's important that I think that the people that have a therapist, have a social worker, have been working on their recoveries from mental illness to speak out, in interviews like this, or in forums, or in, just, make themselves available to be talked to lessen stigma of mental illness.
Right. There's the more you understand, the less of a stigma there is, and then the more you can work towards solutions, is kind of what you're saying.
Yes.
What problem must be resolved now?
Funding. It's always going to be there, money, and again, but the more people talk about it, the more people understand, and the more people are willing to, donate part of their money, maybe at the state level, maybe at the federal level, maybe at the ward level, city level, individuals donating, having a, because because you can only do so much by talking, and getting people to, even that, still, if you get a bunch of people that are talk about their experience, and they get a bunch of other people to come into an agency, whichever agency that is, to get help, that lets policymakers and lawmakers know, hey, there are a lot of people who need these services. Maybe we should provide some more funding. Maybe we should provide some more a center, or a building, or a facility that they can get together at. These agencies get all together at one place and offer the services, and have a place where people with mental illness can go and socialize and be. And it's the only place right now that's interagency would be the Annexer Center, which is in Rogers Park. All the other agencies have their own drop-in centers, but they're restricted to their own clients, so.
You said that there's an interagency in Rogers Park. What is it called again?
The Annexter Center,
The Annex Center?
the Annexter, yes.
Annexter.
Clark Street. Mhm.
Yeah, it's at Clark and Howard. It's right by the DTL clothing store. It's right next to it in the Gateway Shopping Plaza.
So you mentioned that the most important of that to be resolved now is more funding. So are you saying that something like more funding to an organization, interagency like the Annexer would be the most beneficial? Because you had a very big wish list about where funding could go to. What would be top on that list?
Probably at the present moment, just another interagency service.
Mhm.
Interagency drop-in center.
Mhm.
We're talking Clark and Howard way on the north side, so, we need something, down below the loop, offside, something like that, so. I mean, Trilogy is opening a facility at, I think it's 82 or 85 South State. 82, I say 85 block, 85th block, I should say. And they're gonna have that open hopefully by the end of the year.
Mhm.
They just got the idea, I guess they just did the closed on it late last year, so they hope to get enough funding and stuff like that to be able to open it by the end of this year. So that's going to be a benefit for their clients, and they'll be able to accept more clients at that facility. So.
Do you know what the funding was for them to open that facility? Was it mostly donations, or was it funding from which government arm, if from the government?
That I'm not sure about. But I do know that Samantha Hanley, who's the president of Trudy, sent out a email a few months ago saying that whenever they approved the last budget for the state, 144 million was allocated just to mental health, added to mental health. As in, no, it was 144 million added to the budget for mental health.
Okay, so there are funds in addition to that 144 million that is already in there. Do you have any idea about what that figure is?
No, I don't know.
That's okay.
You'd have to read through the budget. So, I don't know. No.
Well, Scott Wajda, thank you so much for joining us on WZRD 88.3 FM today with all your insight about mental health, and then what the patient could do, what policymakers could do to improve the situation for the community. And thank you, Bill Morton, President of the Rogers Park Chamber of Commerce, for joining us today as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a great day and be safe. Thank you. And
Thank you,
we'll
guys.
speak again in the future. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Okay.